Take 5. This video will be mostly an opinion video. I will dump as many facts forward as possible to give you an idea of the severity of the problem, but let's talk about the history of stalking and the law, and the reason stalking had to have laws written for it, and gang stalking and targeted individuals as ideas on the internet. Let's start with stalking. In about 1980, after enough laws had passed that forced the legal system and the people running it and the lawmakers to acknowledge that there was a bias in many laws, and more importantly, that people would refuse to enforce the laws on the books based on what you looked like, how old you were, whether you were male or female. It worked both ways, by the way. This started in the 1980s, actually earlier than that, with the legal system being compelled or bullied or shamed into actually doing their damn job for once. So you had stalking cases becoming much more serious things to be taken seriously. It also didn't help that a bunch of people actually who were stalkers murdered people, and it became very, very obvious that's what was going on. Very obvious. So one of the things about stalking behavior, I'm talking about the actual real world, not really argued whether this happened thing, is that people who did stalking behaviors did them on purpose to where they were deniable, meaning you couldn't prove they were doing it. They would make them as subtle as possible, and if they weren't being subtle, they would state overtly, I'm doing something I know isn't illegal, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that happened enough, including people saying they were doing it to coerce people, to destroy their lives, whatever. And it's not my fault that it's doing exactly what I want. Obviously, this doesn't sound sane now, but back at the time, you did have cases where people sat there, usually men, harassing ex-girlfriends or ex-wives, saying this. This is literally something that happened. It's not something that's debatable anymore. It happened. Now, here's the problem with all of it. They actually said it out loud. And when that happened, then the legal system says, oh, your intent is to avoid prosecution by doing things that aren't illegal but still cause harm, and no one will want it done. And then the response, one of the more famous responses is, I'm not trying to drive the general population to commit suicide. I'm just trying to get my ex-wife to kill herself. This is about the point when people decided, you know what, the laws are getting passed now. Applying the law as is, as best they could, get the person out of the way. And now you have laws where if you have an incident, it's a month in jail. A next incident is a year. After that, it's prison time. And also warning them, oh, by the way, you can't have a firearm, and we're going to make sure you can't catch the person or harass them. The idea is to make it stop and take away this power play. And of course, some of you already know cases where it didn't work out that way because the process has to have multiple layers. The idea is to discourage the person and then punish them away. Let's move on. By the year 2000, expressions like targeted individual and gang stalking became visible. And by 2004, gang stalking as a term went and had a massive spike. Probably because of some news article about someone claiming to be gang stalked or a targeted individual, or it becoming very popular on the internet in general, people began to, on the internet, self-diagnose and become part of group therapy session-like activities discussing their experiences. Now, guided group therapy is what it's usually supposed to be called if you're being technically correct. A bunch of people who are alcoholics or drug addicts getting together talking about the subject aren't necessarily a group therapy to try to stop being an addict or an alcoholic. So if you don't have someone, preferably who is currently not having the problem, preferably a person who had the problem or experienced it in the past, if you don't have that person there guiding you, it goes off the rails and that's it. It gets worse and it turns into a cult-like environment. A self-fulfilling, horrible outcome is created. People don't get better. And more importantly, people get, it turns into a delusional cult sometimes. Now that's about just stalking victims. The post-traumatic stress syndrome group therapy sessions can turn into things that are very destructive to the people trying to get over it, or at least cope with it. So you do need to have somebody who knows what they're doing to help. Stalking-only cases. Australians refer to stalking-only cases happening 23% of the time in the whole population. That's actually kind of frightening. Austrians say it's about 11%. Of the 11%, 70% of that 11% knew the perpetrator. 40% of them were ex-significant others. 23% were friends or acquaintance. The rest were coworkers and random individuals. In Germans, we find it happening 12% of the time, a little higher occurrence. But Australians, obviously, 23% is much worse. 12% of Britons also had this happen. 15% were unaware of any reason for the harassment in the first place. It was just somebody who fixated on them and they didn't know why. 5% said they were stalked by more than one person or perceived it that way. Remember, on the internet, someone can become 50 people, or in my case, 300. I'll talk about that in a minute. 40% of the individuals that said they were stalked by more than one person said it was actually friends and family of the single stalker. So it was a whole family thing. It was a feud thing going on. Now, those are the percentages that we have reportable. Out of Americans, 5% of Americans say they've been stalked. This is stalking. 8% of females and 2% of males say they've been stalked. Now, that seems like a really high number, no matter how low it looks compared to the others. That's a ridiculously bad level. What percentage of the people, let's say, we're going to use a sample size in the United States, because that's what I was able to look up a little easier. What percentage of Americans state that they have been gang stalked versus just stalkings? 8% of females and 2% of males, and then we get to gang stalking. 0.17% of all adult men perceive that they have been gang stalked at one time or another. It doesn't matter how long ago or if it was recent. 0.6%, a lot higher number, of women give that response. So it's a very small portion. The ones who said they were being stalked do not claim to be gang stalked, so it's a separate grouping. So we're looking at a pretty heavy, like 10 to 1 or less, maybe a 12 to 1 ratio. So it's not as common, but it's still too much. So let's talk about the percentage being stalked by more than one person. Most people who say they're TIs or gang stalked individuals by nature say they are being harassed by more than one person. 18% of Americans that said they were stalked, 18% of the stalking victims said they were being stalked by two people. It's a couple, or it could be a brother and sister or something like that, or brother and brother. 13% reported being stalked by three people or more. 11% had been stalked for a very long period of time, 4 years or more. 25% do not know their stalker before the harassment. It's a complete stranger. And again, referring to the upper grouping here, 15% of Britons that were stalked didn't know why it was happening either. So you get the idea. This is a pretty common occurrence. And one of the first things is like, well, if someone's bothering you, they must have a reason. They don't have to. People can just decide to latch onto you because they feel like it. It's a power move. It doesn't need to have a reasoning. Do not attribute rational causes or reasoning to a person as being irrational. Stop assuming the crazy person has good reason or any reason or rationale. They don't have to. We all want to find a way to rationalize things that are irrational. This is a bad idea in these conditions. But anyway, 75% of the population that were stalked in the United States, just stalking, knew the stalker before harassment. Now, the thing is, the overt claim that is specialized for people who claim to be stalked by a group, targeted individual, gang stalk victim, whatever, say that almost all the time they don't know why it's being done, usually, and they almost always say they don't know the individuals, and also say an individual will come and go and never come back, and it'll be replaced by another individual. This is very important. Let's move on. Of people being stalked, conventional stalking we'll call it, 10% did not know the identity of their stalker. 90% knew who the stalker were. It's exactly the opposite of what you find for gang stalking or targeted individuals claims. 11% of the reports out of that entire population turned out to be inaccurate, false. Not necessarily maliciously false, just making a mistake, thinking they were being harassed and finding out it was just some other damn thing. False, mistaken reports. And out of those, 60% of those false or inaccurate reports were made by people who had a constant history of delusions separate from this perception, which meant it was now a new add-on to what they were dealing with. People who've had this continually during their entire lives almost never are taken seriously. People who have delusions of a completely unrelated nature, 60% of the individuals that turned out to be inaccurate were people who are new to having these experiences and reported something when it wasn't happening. This was independently corroboratable by finding out that they would perceive something that literally no one else would. And that's a very important thing. Most of the people, not all, most of the people claiming to have been gang stalked or be targeted individuals state a specialized form of perception or say that something's happening to them that you can't actually observe. And it's not that it's delusional, it's that they're stating that they know that nobody else can see it and they don't know why they're seeing it. A lot of them, not all of them. Now let's move on. Again, of all adult men perceiving gang stalking, it's 0.17%, and it's 0.66% of all female women perceiving gang stalking as a number. However, when you look it up as the total of the number estimated in 2015 of individuals out of the entire population that report gang stalking or targeted individual status, and this is counting people on the internet and also people, just adding them together. They might have an anonymous identity on the internet and might be clinically checked out. The number worked out to about 10,000 people out of the population in the United States. That was 0.003% actually reported positively in such a way that you could count them by 2015. Now, why am I bringing all this up? More than once I've been asked about this in the past, including being hired by people. And I'm going to list the type of clients I've been hired to go check on for this. Number one, an individual that would not let me solve the problem by making it go away because they claimed it was electronic harassment. When I gave them the ability to test whether or not they really were able to perceive radio signals and showed them that there was no possibility of it because in a room with radio signals they didn't sense anything, and in a room that was insulated, given the proper prompting, they perceived a radio signal or some other electronic harassment when it wasn't happening because they were inside of a Faraday cage. When addressing the problem in the comment section for a person who asked for help, I explained to them that they could shunt all radio noises from the electrical system, and then they were told, no, I have to spend $1,000 on a power line conditioner. That's something an audiophile would buy because they read some Stereo Freak magazine bullshit, and I gave her the same response. It's snake oil. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't demonstrate any effects, and more importantly, I'm telling you how to do it to every outlet on your house in a way that won't violate rules, and you just buy the outlet with its own surge protector and radio frequency cleaner in it. It's a $5 device. No, I won't do it. You're part of it. Okay. Next, a business person coming to me. I think I'm being messed with, but I don't know, and the police can't help me. And I found out, it took weeks, I'm not going to go into details because it would be boring, that they were being harassed over the internet by somebody who was a business rival. That's one incident out of probably 100 people who had me do this sort of thing. And I'm going to say over a quarter of them got angry at me for not giving them the answer they wanted, which was, I simply couldn't detect it. Or I can prove by A/B test that they're not actually experiencing it. And this included a person showing me something that wasn't happening in front of me. And I recorded it independently with a video camera. And yes, we even did this because I had a friend, an 8mm film camera in case it was something I couldn't detect. And it had the filters off, so it would have detected ultraviolet and infrared. There's a specialized hunk of equipment for that. Yes, the lenses that can do that. The point is that the vast majority of cases where a person claims to be a targeted individual or gang stalked involve them reacting to random people who do not come by more than once in a day or once in a week, any area they're in. And they just assume that everyone they're seeing is somehow part of a harassment. That's a large portion of the individuals. And this includes people on YouTube seemingly posting this proof that they perceive everything as a threat. Last part. A large number of these people are victims of conventional stalking that were driven successfully insane. The greatest punishment an evildoer can do to you is to keep the punishment going when they're not doing it, by you never ever letting go of the fear. It's post-traumatic stress syndrome for a large number of these people. Most of them cite an original occurrence of ordinary stalking that's no longer happening. That's the primary cause for most of it. The rest of it is attributable to misinterpreting things around them and not learning, which some of them adapt and some don't. And the rest, and a smaller number, very small number, are actually mentally ill. Induced mental illness can be cured a lot easier. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. I'll do a part 2 if you ask. Bye.